We are indeed excited about today's webinar because it's much different than most webinars that are out there. Carol Hurley is the Chief Administrative Judge for the Department of Human Services in Texas, but more importantly to our discussion today, she's the mother of two young ladies who have been diagnosed with effects related to their prenatal alcohol exposure. And Carol, in fact, wrote the chapter for our new book that's coming out, Moment-to-Moment Perspectives on FASDs. So she's going to talk from a very practical perspective today about parenting adolescents with FASD. For my part, I just want to review for all of you the basic concepts that we deal with when we talk about children affected by prenatal alcohol exposure. And if you've attended our previous webinars, you'll remember that I'd like to look at these children from a perspective of information processing. That is, how do they bring information into the brain and use it? And there are three domains that are particularly of importance when working with this population. The first is neurocognitive functioning. Neurocognitive functioning includes things like memory, especially working memory, things like executive functioning, the ability to plan and complete a task. The second domain is self-regulation. How well is the individual able to regulate behavior so that the young person responds appropriately to the world around him or her? Self-regulation difficulties show up as sensory processing problems, emotional dysregulation with temper outbursts, and trouble regulating mood, and overall as behavior. And so many of these children are diagnosed with ADHD. And then the third component is adaptive functioning, the ability to take information you know cognitively and apply it to day-to-day living. So as we look at these three domains, the question we're going to ask Carol is, how do the neurobehavioral deficits exhibited by a child with FASDs affect day-to-day living? And so I'm going to turn the webinar over to Carol. I may be asking questions myself along the way, but I think that you'll find this is a very interesting discussion because Carol is living the life day to day.
Thank you, and thank you all for joining us today. SOS is what I call the way we live our lives every day at my house. And sometimes it's a cry for help, just like the Morse code, or sometimes it's just our survival strategy. SOS stands for structure, organization, and supervision. And these are three of the most important aspects of running my home and raising my children as they're growing older. As we become parents of adolescents who have challenges, our friends don't always understand what's going on with us and at our house. I know when my kids were younger, I longed for the days when their independence that they would have greater independence, they would be able to take care of more things themselves, and life would get a little bit easier and simpler. And I'm finding out what most of you probably also are finding out, and that is it doesn't get simpler for us because our children may begin to look more independent and act more independent, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're making good choices or that they're capable of being the independent, self-regulated people that we were hoping they would be growing into. So for us as parents, this is a really frustrating time. The rest of the world sees our children reaching chronological adulthood, and that can be very different from their developmental level. When I talk about chronological adulthood, I mean our kids are in their late teens, they're approaching 18, which is the time when the rest of the world says, well, they're ready to make their own decisions. And unless you've been to court and gotten a guardianship over your child, the world lets them make those decisions. And they're not always ready to. They may act their age in some circumstances, they may look their age, but their judgment and their ability to make decisions are not 18. They're not adults. Usually they're anywhere from 3 to 6 years behind. So you may have an 18-year-old who makes decisions more like a 12-year-old. And there are a lot of things in the world we don't let a 12-year-old do because they're not ready to. So your 18-year-old or your 15-year-old who is making decisions more like a 10-year-old really needs to be protected from those potentially really bad decisions. So don't put your developmentally younger child in those situations that maybe the world might think they're chronologically ready for. It's really scary when they get to be high school age and they're exposed to a lot of kids who are making decisions that maybe aren't the greatest, but they're trying things out and they're able to get themselves back out of bad situations. Whereas when our children end up in those bad situations, they don't have the experience or the expertise or the maturity level to get themselves back out. They don't think on their feet as quickly as those typically developing kids do. And again, they may look perfectly normal. I've had lots of long discussions with teachers and school administrators and even friends who seem to think that my children's developmental lagging behind is maybe my fault for overparenting or being a helicopter mom, because they don't live with my kids and they don't understand that my children have a neurological challenge that makes them a little bit behind their peers. So the world is looking at your child like an adult, but as the parent, we have to make sure that we're protecting our children and protecting them in a loving way that our children can also live with. Because again, we've got teenagers and every teenager is a difficult child. Some of the things that work really well to help, especially with those behavioral problems that tend to come up, are structure inside the home. The first thing that I try to explain to folks is keep life consistent. And we all know that consistency means that everything is sort of the same. We don't move around from house to house. We lead nice, stable, ordinary lives. We don't live in our cars or on the streets. And so a lot of people think that that's what consistent is. It's just living in a home, going to work, going to school. But when I talk about consistency, I mean really boring consistency. I mean doing the same thing the same way every single day. We get up at the same time. We generally go to bed at the same time. We do the same things in the same order every single day. That's the consistency that really helps keep our kids on track and helps them to be able to behave well. They don't do well with surprises. One time, someone came over to my house to have a surprise birthday visit, and it was disastrous, and they were so upset and disappointed, and all I could say was, we don't do surprises here. Because if my children can anticipate what's going to happen next, they can pretty much regulate their behavior, and they've got plenty of time to do that. There's no split-second decision about how to do something. And they get really stressed when they have to move too quickly or think too fast. Familiar foods sounds pretty boring and pretty basic, but really, I have found that if we eat pretty much the same kinds of things, that life goes a lot smoother, especially in the mornings. Every single school day since my children started school, we have basically had the same breakfast. And I get really tired of that. And I would love to be an awesome mom and wake up one morning and make pancakes. But if I did that, our morning would fall apart and we would never get out the door because it would be a surprise and it would be something different. So really, even just as simple as serving the same food for breakfast or the same kinds of foods and not being spontaneous. Spontaneity, again, can just throw everything up in the air and everyone's behavior tends to decompensate. Always be prepared for those meltdowns because they're going to happen and you never know when they're going to happen. So don't let it bother you. Don't let it surprise you. Know in advance before you go somewhere or start an activity what your backup plan is going to be so that when that meltdown starts, you're ready to take it in stride and move on, whether it's moving your child out of the situation they're in, or whether it's just living with the meltdown while it works itself out and ignoring other people who stare. Just be prepared for it, and don't let it throw you, because your calmness is necessary to help your child. Build in frequent short breaks. For some reason, our children tire very quickly. Maybe they don't physically tire, but they mentally tire. And so building in frequent short breaks really helps them if you're doing homework, or teaching a new skill, or even cleaning their bedrooms. It works really well at my house if we set a timer for 15 minutes and we do the activity for 15 minutes, and then we take a 5-minute break and do something else that's pure fun. And we tend to get a lot more accomplished that way. And most of all, be patient. Deep breathing and just reminding yourself that your child is doing the best they can, and you're doing the best you can too. And patience goes a long way toward just helping everybody get through the stress. Organization. We all want to be organized, but I've had to really simplify everything at my house. Declutter. We have what we need, but we don't have a lot of extra, especially in the kids' bedrooms. As our children become adolescents, they want to do things their way. They want to decorate their room the way they want it. But sometimes my older daughter has trouble getting rid of things, and so we have to really work hard to declutter her bedroom, make sure that the clothes in her closet are all appropriate to wear, and that there's not too many of them, because too many choices make it very difficult to get dressed in the morning and move on about our day. We have a pretty simplified schedule too, and we follow the same schedule every single day. Every school day, it's getting up at the same time, eating breakfast, leaving at the same time, and then again when we come home in the evening, we come home, we do certain activities in the same order, and then we head upstairs to take baths and go to bed. I try really hard to limit our choices so that any choice that my child makes is a good choice. I try to have a place for everything and label it. I can remember where the socks go, but really sometimes my kids just get into a hurry, and either they don't remember or they don't want to think about it. If they thought about it for a minute, they could figure it out, but it's so much easier just to have a label right there, and then everyone knows where to put something. We have a set of hooks by the door so that when we come in the evening, my keys go there, because I'm notorious for losing my keys. Their book bags go there, coats, jackets, raincoats, umbrellas, everything that we need to get back out the door is right there. Then when it's time later in the afternoon or early evening to do homework, the book bag is right there. And then when we're ready to go in the evening, go to bed, everything goes back onto those hooks so that everything's right there and we're ready to walk out the front door the next day, and we're not looking for my keys, because usually I'm just as bad as they are. Another thing that we do is called the binder system. The binder system is a way of organizing for school that my daughter and I developed when she started high school. And what I discovered is in high schools, they really don't provide the kids with a lot of guidance about how to do things, how to organize their work. But it's really important that we help our kids stay organized. They expect our children to know this by the time they reach high school. And my older daughter is a really, really smart kid, but she has absolutely no ability to organize anything, and it's not her fault. That's just a part of her brain that doesn't work right. So here is how we have developed a system that has been pretty helpful. Each subject has its own binder, and we write the name of the subject clearly on the spine. And you can see on the slide, we've got English, math, and biology. I use a white binder with black ink so that there's clear contrast and she can see it. There's nothing wrong with my daughter's vision, but if there's too much going on, she won't see what's important. It's overstimulating to have a lot of color, a lot of design, a lot of pattern. So I know it's a boring white binder, but that's what she can see the easiest. And when she's in the hallway passing from period to period, she needs to easily be able to see what it is she needs and where she needs to put it. The first item in every single binder is a colored clear plastic pocket that's clearly labeled with the words "Turn In." When she gets to class in the morning, she pulls the binder out for that particular class. She opens it up, and if there's anything in that plastic pocket, she knows it's something she needs to turn in. Because even if she's worked for hours on a homework assignment the night before, when she gets to class, it has completely left her brain that she needs to turn something in. And I can't even say that our children forget, because they don't forget, it's gone. To me, forgetting implies that it's there and they just didn't remember. But I know for my daughter, it's not even in her brain that she needs to think, do I turn something in or do I not? So there it is. She opens the binder and she knows she has a piece of homework to turn in. The next item, or the back of that turn-in pocket, if it's a two-sided pocket, is another colored clear plastic pocket labeled clearly with the words homework. Ideally, this is a second pocket that's a different color. The reason it has to be colored is because a clear pocket will disappear. If she were to open that binder and that were a clear pocket, she wouldn't even notice that it was there. So that's why it has to be colored. And if the second one is a different color than the first one, maybe the first one is green, the second one is red, it just adds to the concept of contrast so that she can see, okay, here's my second pocket, it's a different color, and it has homework in it. Anything that's handed out during class slips into that homework pocket. Another thing that we do at home to stay organized is we have to-do lists. And this is a screenshot of a typical to-do list, and it looks very, very long. One of my friends was at my house one day, and she said, oh my gosh, no wonder your daughter never gets everything done. Look how much there is to do. And then she started to look at what's on the list. Things like get dressed, eat breakfast, put your breakfast dishes in the dishwasher, brush your teeth. Other kids probably don't need a to-do list that's this specific. But by putting everything on there and letting my child check it off as she does it, she gets a sense of accomplishment that she's getting things done. And she doesn't have to have me reminding her every step of the way, did you do this? Did you do this? So it allows her to take a little bit more responsibility for things like taking her medication, making sure that she's got everything in her bag, brushing her hair, brushing her teeth. So at my house, a very detailed checklist sometimes works really well. Now, again, we're talking about teenagers, so sometimes a very detailed checklist doesn't work well at all. And sometimes it's a day-by-day thing. But this is just a sample of what we use. So we've talked about structure and organization, and the next thing that's so critical is supervision. And this is a place where I really had to struggle as my daughter became a teenager, and I was looking forward to letting her go out in the world and do things and really stretch her independence. And I realized that because her decision making sometimes is poor, that supervision is absolutely critical to keeping her out of trouble. And that's really what it is. It's supervision to prevent other problems that we may not be able to get past. So one of the places where a lot of teenage kids get into trouble is on the way to school, either on the way to school with friends and somehow they don't always make it to school, or they come up with ideas to do things that are poor decisions that their friends may be able to talk them into doing. So my children don't ride the bus and they don't go to school with friends. It's not an easy thing for me to do to take them to school myself and get to my office on time every day. But I think it's pretty important that they're not left to their own devices first thing in the morning. My older daughter, I've always taken her to school pretty close to the time school starts, because if I let her go at school early, that would give her an opportunity to get really distracted by the social scene and the social network, which are really important to her, but again, they sometimes distract from the school day. Other parents are not going to understand why your child needs to be supervised so well. They may be happy dropping their kids off at a movie theater or dropping their kids off at the mall, or in my city, I live in Austin, which is the live music capital of the world. And a lot of high school kids just go to music festivals by themselves and everything goes well. But my child needs more supervision than that. You might drop a typical 16-year-old off at a music festival and then, pick them back up at 10 or 11 at night, but you wouldn't do that to a 12-year-old. And your 16-year-old might be a lot closer to a 12-year-old. So keep that in mind when you think about how you want to supervise your child and what supervision your child needs. And it's not going to go smoothly with your child. Nobody, 12 or 16, wants their mom or dad hanging around, because that's what teenagers are supposed to be. They're supposed to be difficult. But this is your child's life and you're in charge, so supervise. Check your planner, your child's planner every day, and be nearby while they do homework. Again, a typical high school student, you shouldn't have to supervise their homework. But our kids have a lot of trouble staying on track. They have a lot of trouble remembering what they're supposed to do and what they're supposed to do next. So if you just ask your child, hey, is there any homework written in the planner? The answer is liable to be no, and they believe it's no. They're not lying, and they're not trying to get out of doing homework, probably. But you need to check, and you need to supervise and make sure that all parts of the homework get done. Even as a senior in high school, my brilliant, beautiful daughter would complete one side of a worksheet and assume she was done. She'd be happy to do the other side if she had turned it over and seen it, but it didn't occur to her to turn it over and look at it. So that's why I had to supervise. It's absolutely important that you monitor computer use and all cell phone use. Many typical teenagers don't have anyone looking over their shoulder, and they're accessing inappropriate content, and they're using their cell phones to take inappropriate pictures, and they're texting them and they're emailing them. And since we already know that our children have trouble making good decisions, and our children tend to get into situations where they don't know immediately how to get themselves back out, we have to be much more careful than the typical parent. I really think most typical parents should do a better job, but I don't have a typical child, so I really can't speak to that. One of the things that I did early on when my older daughter got her first smartphone was to arrange the data plan so that she could not text or email pictures. She has the least amount of data possible, and all the rest of the data goes to my phone. And also I set it up so that she could not purchase anything. I have a lot of friends who have challenged children and who have typical children who are always complaining that their child spent $45 on apps last month. And I just think, how can that be? Because if you set your cell phone data plan up and your cell phone usage plan up properly, that phone cannot be used to purchase anything. You may have to go into your phone store and ask them how to do that, but it is possible. And it's really important that you do it at the beginning, not after something bad has happened. Don't wait until you find out your child has texted an inappropriate picture. Set up the cell phone data plan when the cell phone comes into their hands. Always use the parental settings so that whatever your child does access is appropriate. And remember, you make the rules. You are in charge. You make sure you have all the passwords. And if your child changes a password and refuses to give it to you, you take the phone away. You can check that phone, and if anything's been deleted before you reviewed it, take that phone away. So keep your children safe. Be realistic about what the future holds for them. Take a deep breath. And when it's time, you can let them go.
Carol, thank you so much. This has been fascinating. We've mentioned the film coming out, and I think that it's going to really have a marked message. It's going to have an impact on folks that see it. If you have questions following this webinar, email us through ntiupstream.com, and we will make sure that your message gets to Carol with further questions. Thank you all for attending today. Carol, especially thank you to you for bringing your insight, wisdom, and humor to a very difficult subject. Thank you.